The moment I heard my name, I froze outside the dining room door. My fiancé, Jonathan, and his mother, Patricia, sat at the table, their backs to me, laughing about something. I was about to walk in when Patricia's words stopped me cold. "She's so controlling," Patricia said, dabbing her eyes from laughing. "Remember how she refused to let Jonathan visit me on my birthday, told him she needed him home for some imaginary emergency." My heart dropped to my stomach. That never happened. Jonathan had visited his mother on her birthday. I had packed his overnight bag myself, folded his shirts the way he liked, and reminded him to bring her favorite flowers. Jonathan chuckled. "She gets jealous so easily. I have to hide my phone sometimes just to avoid the interrogation." I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. My legs felt weak. This was a complete fabrication. I never checked his phone. I never interrogated him. The betrayal felt like ice water flooding my veins, making it hard to breathe. Part of me wanted to burst through that door and demand an explanation, but something held me back. If I confronted them now, emotional and unprepared, they would twist it. They would use my reaction as proof of the very behavior they were inventing. So I swallowed my shock and walked in with a smile. "Sorry I'm late," I said calmly, my voice steady despite my racing heart. They never knew I had heard everything. 3 weeks later, I attended my friend Carla's wedding. I expected a night of celebration, dancing, and joy. Instead, I walked into a nightmare I never saw coming. I was getting a drink at the bar when I overheard 2 women whispering nearby. "That's Jonathan's fiancée," one said, nodding toward me. "I heard she monitors all his messages. Poor guy can't even text his own mother without her approval." My face burned with shame and confusion. The lie had traveled beyond Patricia's dining room. It was spreading through our entire social circle like wildfire, and I had no idea how far it had already gone. Throughout the evening, I noticed the sideways glances. Friends who used to hug me warmly now offered stiff handshakes. Conversations stopped abruptly when I approached. Even Carla seemed hesitant around me, as if unsure whether to believe what she had heard about her own bridesmaid. The worst part was the inconsistencies. One person said I had forbidden Jonathan from attending family events. Another claimed I had demanded access to all his passwords. The stories didn't match because they weren't real. They were inventions, growing wilder and more damaging with each retelling. I spent the reception smiling while my stomach churned with anxiety. How had this happened so fast? How had one overheard conversation turned into a campaign against my character? Driving home that night, I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white and tears blurred my vision. I couldn't confront this blindly. I needed a plan. I started paying attention to everything. Every text Jonathan sent, every comment Patricia made, every whisper that stopped when I entered a room. I became hyper-aware of every glance, every pause, every shift in tone. I kept a small notebook hidden in my purse. After each interaction, I would excuse myself to the bathroom and write down exactly what was said, who said it, and when. Dates, times, direct quotes. My hands sometimes shook as I wrote. I needed accuracy because I knew my word alone wouldn't be enough against theirs. Jonathan came home one evening talking about brunch plans with his mother. "She mentioned you've been distant lately," he said casually, not even looking up from his phone. "Maybe you should call her more often." I nodded and smiled, but inside I was cataloging every word. Patricia was positioning herself as the victim now, the concerned mother-in-law being shut out by an unkind fiancé. The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced. The challenge was enormous. I couldn't confront them without proof. If I accused Patricia of lying, she would cry and Jonathan would comfort her. If I showed Jonathan my notebook now, he might warn his mother, and they would cover their tracks carefully. I needed patience. I needed to let them believe they were winning while I quietly built my case. It felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon, one wrong step away from losing everything. But I had no other choice. The truth was on my side. I just had to prove it for. Diana noticed something was wrong before I said a word. We worked in the same department, and she found me crying in the break room one afternoon, mascara running down my cheeks. "Whatever it is," she said gently, sitting beside me and placing her hand on my shoulder, "you don't have to handle it alone." I didn't plan to tell her everything, but it poured out between sobs, the overheard conversation, the wedding whispers, the growing isolation, the feeling of being erased. Diana listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from sympathy to something sharper, recognition. "I've seen this before," she said when I finished. "People who lie like this, they get comfortable, they get sloppy, they start believing their own stories. The key is patience." She explained that confrontation rarely worked against skilled manipulators. They thrived on emotional reactions because emotions could be twisted into evidence. Instead, I needed to expose the inconsistencies gradually, letting others see the cracks without me pointing directly at them. "Document everything," Diana advised, her voice firm but kind. "Dates, witnesses, contradictions. When the moment comes, you'll have receipts they can't deny or explain away." For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. Diana wasn't just sympathetic, she was strategic. She understood that this wasn't about winning an argument. It was about reclaiming my reputation without giving them ammunition. I left that conversation with a plan forming in my mind. I wasn't helpless. I had an ally who believed me. And I was ready to fight back. I tested Jonathan that evening. We were cooking dinner together, standing side by side at the counter, and I brought up his mother casually. "Patricia mentioned I've been distant," I said, keeping my voice light while my heart pounded. "Have I done something to upset her?" Jonathan's hands paused over the cutting board, just for a second, but I caught it. He resumed chopping, but his rhythm was off, the knife hitting the board unevenly. "She just worries," he said, his eyes fixed on the vegetables. "You know how mothers are." "What exactly did she say I did?" Another pause, longer this time. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Nothing specific, just a general feeling she has." He was lying. I could see it in the way he avoided my eyes, the way his shoulders tensed beneath his shirt. He knew exactly what Patricia had said because he had helped create the narrative, but confronted with direct questions. He faltered. He wasn't prepared. I smiled and changed the subject, commenting on the weather, but inside I was noting every detail. His hesitation, his vague answers, the way he deflected rather than defended me. This was valuable information. Jonathan wasn't a confident liar. When pressed, he stumbled. That meant there were cracks in their united front, cracks I could widen with patience. I kissed his cheek and returned to cooking, playing the role of the unsuspecting fiancé perfectly. But I was done being unsuspecting. Now I was calculating every move. The first real slip happened at Sunday brunch. Patricia was holding court at the head of the table, entertaining Jonathan's aunts with dramatic stories about wedding planning. "Evelyn wanted to exclude half the family from the guest list," Patricia announced, shaking her head with exaggerated disappointment. "I had to insist we include everyone. You know how important family is to me." I kept my face neutral, but my heart raced beneath my calm exterior. Just last week, Patricia had told Jonathan's cousin that I was inviting too many people and making the wedding unmanageable. The stories directly contradicted each other. Jonathan's Aunt Helen frowned slightly, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth. She had been at both conversations. I saw the confusion flicker across her face before she masked it with a polite smile and continued eating. Patricia didn't notice. She was too busy basking in the sympathetic attention, too confident in her narrative to realize she had exposed a flaw. Her lies were multiplying faster than she could track them, and she was getting careless. After brunch, I wrote everything down in my notebook. Date, attendees, exact quotes. I also noted Aunt Helen's reaction. She hadn't said anything, but she had noticed the contradiction. That was enough for now. I didn't need public confrontation yet. I needed witnesses to the inconsistencies. Eventually, the contradictions would become too obvious for anyone to ignore. Patricia's arrogance was her weakness, and I intended to use it against her. I became meticulous about documentation. Every email Patricia sent me, I saved and categorized in folders. Every text from Jonathan discussing his mother, I screenshot and stored securely. I started keeping receipts for everything I bought, gifts for Patricia's birthday, ingredients for family dinners I hosted, flowers I sent for her anniversary. Physical proof that contradicted the narrative of a selfish, controlling fiancé who didn't care about family. Photos became important too. I made sure to take pictures at every family event, time-stamped and geotagged automatically. Me smiling with relatives, me helping set the table and wash dishes, me sitting beside Patricia at family dinners, visual evidence of participation and warmth that couldn't be denied. Diana helped me organize everything into folders on a secure cloud drive with backups. Think of it as building a case, she said during one of our coffee meetings. Not for court, but for credibility. When the time comes, truth needs proof. It felt strange at first, documenting my own life so carefully, as if I were a detective investigating myself. But it also felt empowering. I was no longer a passive victim absorbing attacks silently. I was creating a record that would validate my truth when the time came. Nobody noticed my preparations. Jonathan saw me taking photos and assumed I was sentimental and romantic. Patricia saw me being helpful and assumed I was trying to impress her. They had no idea I was building my defense, one receipt and one photo at a time. The public humiliation came at Patricia's charity gala. She had organized a fundraiser for the local hospital, and our entire social circle attended in formal attire. During her speech, Patricia thanked everyone for their generous support. Then she turned to me with a sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Even Evelyn managed to contribute this year," she said sweetly into the microphone. "I know charitable giving isn't really her priority, but we're grateful for any effort, however small." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Polite, awkward laughter, but laughter nonetheless. My face burned as dozens of eyes turned to me with pity or amusement. I had donated $500 to that fundraiser, more than most guests in attendance, but Patricia had twisted it into evidence of my selfishness and apathy. I wanted to stand up and correct her. I wanted to pull out my donation receipt and wave it in her face in front of everyone, but Diana's voice echoed in my mind. Emotional reactions feed manipulators. Stay composed. Don't give them what they want. So I smiled graciously and nodded, absorbing the humiliation while cataloging every detail internally. The exact words, the mocking tone, the witnesses who heard. Jonathan squeezed my hand under the table, but he said nothing to defend me. His silence spoke volumes about where his loyalty truly lay. That night, I added the gala to my documentation with trembling hands. Patricia thought she had wounded me. She had only strengthened my resolve to expose her. I threw myself into networking with new energy and purpose. At work, I volunteered for high-visibility projects. I attended industry events and connected with colleagues from other departments who knew nothing about Patricia's lies. Diana introduced me to her professional contacts, women who valued integrity and saw through superficial charm. I built relationships with people who judged me by my actions and work ethic rather than Patricia's poisonous rumors. Slowly, I noticed a shift. Colleagues who had been distant began seeking me out for advice. Supervisors who had overlooked me started requesting my input on important decisions. My reputation at work grew stronger even as Patricia worked tirelessly to destroy it socially. I also reconnected with old friends who existed outside Jonathan's family circle. People who knew me before the engagement, who remembered my character before the lies began. They became anchors of support, reminding me who I really was. The professional credibility mattered because it created contrast. When Patricia painted me as controlling and selfish, my colleagues saw someone collaborative, generous, and kind. The disconnect would eventually become visible to everyone who knew both versions. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was building a foundation of witnesses who could testify to my true character when the time came. Patricia thought she was isolating me from everyone. Instead, she was forcing me to create an army of allies who knew the real me. And that army was growing stronger every day. Small victories began to accumulate like drops of water wearing away stone. At a backyard barbecue, I overheard Jonathan's cousin questioning the timeline of Patricia's stories while getting food. "Wait," she said to another relative, frowning in confusion. I thought Evelyn planned the entire Easter dinner. She sent me the invitation herself, but Patricia said she refused to help at all. The other relative shrugged uncertainly, but the seed was planted. Doubt was creeping into conversations, growing in the spaces between Patricia's contradictions. A week later, Jonathan's Aunt Helen pulled me aside at a family gathering, her expression serious. "I don't know what's going on," she said quietly so no one else could hear, "but some things aren't adding up. Just know I'm paying attention." She didn't promise support outright, but her words meant everything to me. Someone was noticing. Someone was questioning the narrative. I continued my strategy of subtle exposure. When Patricia claimed I had skipped a family event, I casually mentioned the photos I had taken there. When she said I never called her, I referenced our recent phone conversation in front of witnesses who had been there. I never accused her directly. I simply stated facts that contradicted her narrative. Each time, I watched confusion flicker across faces as people tried to reconcile what they had heard with what they were seeing. Truth has its own gravity. I just needed to let it do its work, pulling everything toward the light. I started journaling at night after Jonathan fell asleep. Not documentation, that was strategic. This was emotional, raw, and honest. I wrote about the betrayal that kept me awake, staring at the ceiling in the darkness. The anger I couldn't express without becoming the villain they had invented. The loneliness of smiling through slander while my heart ached. I wrote about Jonathan, the man I had agreed to marry. The man who laughed at lies about me and never once defended my name. I loved him still, and that made the betrayal sharper, like a knife twisted in a wound. How could someone who claimed to love me participate in my destruction? How could he watch me suffer and say nothing? Diana was the only one who saw these pages. She read them without judgment, offering presents instead of solutions, sitting with me in my pain. "You're allowed to grieve," she said during one of our talks. "This is a loss. The relationship you thought you had, that's gone now. What comes next depends on the truth coming out." She was right. Beneath my strategy and documentation, there was genuine heartbreak. I was mourning the future I had imagined, the family I thought I was joining, the man I thought I knew. But grief didn't weaken my resolve. It fueled it like fire. Every tear I shed in private became determination in public. I would not let their lies become my legacy. Patricia must have sensed something shifting in the atmosphere. At the next family gathering, she escalated dramatically, her voice rising with barely concealed panic. "Evelyn has been so secretive lately," she announced to the room, looking around for agreement. "Always on her phone, hiding conversations. I worry about what she's planning against this family." The accusation was absurd. I was the most transparent person at that table. But Patricia needed to regain control of the narrative, so she was throwing everything at the wall, hoping something would stick. Jonathan nodded along with his mother, not even glancing at me for my reaction. "I've noticed too," he added, his voice flat and rehearsed. "She's been different lately." I kept my expression calm, but inside I was taking careful notes. They were getting desperate. Patricia's accusations were becoming wilder, less grounded in anything resembling reality. And Jonathan was following her lead without question, like a puppet on strings. Desperation makes people reckless. They would make mistakes now, bigger mistakes, because they felt their control slipping away. Aunt Helen caught my eye from across the table. Her expression was unreadable, but she was watching closely. Others were watching too, their eyes darting between Patricia and me. Patricia and Jonathan thought they were burying me deeper. They didn't realize they were digging their own grave with every wild accusation. I just had to wait patiently for them to fall in. I started planting seeds more deliberately now. Small truths dropped into casual conversations like stones into still water, creating ripples. At coffee with Jonathan's cousin, I mentioned the surprise party I had organized for Patricia's birthday. I was so nervous she wouldn't like the decorations, I said warmly. I spent days choosing her favorite colors. His cousin frowned, setting down her cup. Patricia told me you forgot her birthday entirely. She cried about it. Really? I kept my voice curious rather than defensive. That's strange. I have photos from the party on my phone. I could show you if you'd like. I watched realization dawn slowly on her face. She didn't say anything more, but I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. At another gathering, I mentioned the family recipe Patricia had taught me. She was so patient explaining all the steps, I said with genuine-sounding gratitude. I wrote everything down. Someone overheard and looked confused. Patricia said you refused to learn any of her recipes, that you thought they weren't good enough for you. That's odd, I replied with a gentle smile. We spent a whole afternoon cooking together in her kitchen. Jonathan took pictures of us. Each interaction was carefully chosen. I never attacked Patricia directly. I simply stated my truth and let it collide with her lies. The contradictions were becoming too numerous to ignore. People were starting to see the pattern emerging. And Patricia had no idea it was happening right under her nose. The first real confrontation happened at Sunday brunch. Patricia was telling a story about how I had embarrassed her at a charity event by refusing to sit with her, forcing her to sit alone. I waited for her to finish, my hands folded calmly in my lap. Then I spoke. Patricia, I'm confused. We sat together the entire evening. I have photos from that night. We're at the same table in every single picture. The table went silent. Forks stopped moving. Patricia's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, she had no immediate response prepared. You must be remembering wrong, she finally said, but her voice wavered and her eyes darted nervously. I have the photos on my phone, I offered calmly. Would you like to see them? She declined quickly, waving her hand dismissively. It doesn't matter. I'm sure I just confused the dates. It's easy to do. But it did matter. Everyone at that table had witnessed her falter. They had seen certainty crumble into weak excuses. Jonathan stared at his plate, saying nothing, his jaw clenched tight. After brunch, 2 of his cousins approached me separately. They didn't say much, just that they appreciated me clarifying things and that they'd been confused. It was the first visible crack in the wall, small but significant. The power was finally shifting in my direction. Jonathan came to me that night with an apology I hadn't requested or expected. I know things have been tense, he said, taking my hands in his and looking at me with pleading eyes. Maybe we should just move past it, start fresh, let go of whatever happened between you and my mother. I looked at him carefully, searching his face. He wasn't apologizing for the lies. He wasn't acknowledging what he and his mother had done to me. He was asking me to forget so he wouldn't have to face consequences or discomfort. What exactly are you asking me to let go? I asked, keeping my voice steady. He shifted uncomfortably, dropping his eyes. Just the misunderstandings, the family stuff. Can't we just move forward? Misunderstandings. I kept my voice level despite the anger rising in my chest. Is that what you call deliberately lying about me to everyone we know? He didn't answer. He couldn't. I understood then with painful clarity that Jonathan would never truly stand with me. He wanted peace, not justice. He wanted comfort, not truth. His loyalty would always belong to his mother, no matter what she did. If I accepted his non-apology, I would be erasing my own experience. I would be agreeing that the lies were merely misunderstandings. I would be surrendering everything I had worked to protect. I can't let this go, I said quietly but firmly. Not until it's actually resolved with the truth. He looked wounded, but I felt nothing but clarity. I was done accepting crumbs. I orchestrated my next move carefully, like a chess player thinking several moves ahead. I organized a small gathering, just close family, and made sure Patricia felt comfortable enough to talk freely. The conversation turned to wedding planning. Patricia began complaining about vendors. I had supposedly rejected without consulting her. "That's interesting," said Aunt Helen, cutting in with a sharp look. "Evelyn showed me the vendor proposals last week. She said she wanted your input on all of them. She was worried about choosing without you." Patricia blinked rapidly. "Well, I meant—" "And you mentioned that Evelyn refused to include your florist," Helen continued, her voice steady. "But I saw the email where she specifically asked for that florist's information. I was copied on it." The room grew quiet. Patricia's face reddened deeply. She opened her mouth to respond, but there was nowhere to go. Her lies were colliding with documented reality in front of everyone. I said nothing. I didn't need to. Aunt Helen and the evidence were speaking for me more powerfully than I ever could. That evening, Jonathan's uncle pulled me aside in the hallway. "I don't know everything that's been happening," he said gruffly, "but I know what I saw today. Helen and I are on your side." I thanked him and felt something loosen in my chest for the first time in months. Finally, someone believed me. The truth was surfacing without me forcing it. The time had come to share everything. I gathered key family members, Aunt Helen, Jonathan's uncle, his two cousins who had shown me support. I kept it small and private, meeting at Helen's house. I didn't make accusations or raise my voice. I simply shared documentation. Emails showing collaboration Patricia claimed never happened. Receipts for gifts she said I never gave. Photos from events she insisted I had skipped. I laid out the timeline calmly, connecting each lie to its contradiction. No drama, no tears, just facts arranged in undeniable order. The room was silent when I finished. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" his cousin asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Because I needed you to see the pattern yourselves," I replied honestly. "Words against words would have gotten nowhere. She's been doing this for months." Aunt Helen shook her head slowly, her eyes glistening. "I knew something was wrong. I should have pushed harder. I'm so sorry, Evelyn." "You're here now," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "That's what matters." Over the next few days, word spread quietly through the family. Phone calls were made. Conversations happened behind closed doors. The evidence was shared and discussed. I wasn't present for those discussions, but I felt the shift like a change in weather. The family was realigning around the truth. Patricia had no idea her fortress was crumbling from within. Patricia's reaction was explosive, like a dam breaking. She confronted me at a family dinner, voice shaking with rage. "You've been poisoning everyone against me," she accused in front of the entire table, pointing at me. "Twisting stories, manipulating my family. You're a snake. You've always been jealous of my relationship with Jonathan." I stayed seated, my hands trembling slightly under the table, but I kept them hidden in my lap. "I haven't poisoned anyone," I said quietly, my voice steady. "I've only shared the truth." "Lies," she shouted, her face contorted with fury. "You've told lies about me to make yourself look good. You're trying to steal my son." The irony was almost unbearable, but I didn't point it out. I didn't need to. Aunt Helen spoke up firmly. "Patricia, we've seen the documentation. Emails, receipts, photos. The story Evelyn tells matches the evidence. Yours doesn't, not once." Patricia's face contorted with fury. She turned on Helen, then on her other relatives, accusing everyone of betrayal and conspiracy against her. Her voice grew louder, her words more erratic and desperate. Jonathan tried to calm her down, but she pushed him away roughly. The more she raged, the more she proved my point. This wasn't a woman who had been wronged. This was a woman who had lost control of her narrative and couldn't handle it. I watched in silence as she destroyed her own credibility more thoroughly than I ever could. The unexpected confirmation came from Brianna, a mutual friend I had barely spoken to in months. She had avoided me at every gathering. She approached me at a coffee shop, looking deeply uncomfortable. "I need to tell you something," she said, sitting down across from me. "I should have said it sooner. I've been a coward." Brianna had been at a lunch with Patricia several months ago. Patricia had explicitly asked her to spread the story about my controlling behavior to our friend group. She said it was for Jonathan's sake, Brianna explained, tears forming in her eyes. That you were isolating him from family and he was too blind to see it. But the things I've seen don't match what she told me. I'm so sorry I repeated any of it. I was stupid to believe her. Her confession was the final piece of the puzzle. Not just contradictions and documentation. Now I had a witness to the deliberate intent behind the lies. I thanked Brianna and asked if she would share this with Jonathan's family. She agreed immediately, desperate to make amends. That evening, sitting alone in my car, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel throughout this ordeal: vindication. Patricia hadn't just made mistakes or misremembered events. She had orchestrated a deliberate campaign. She had recruited people to spread falsehoods about me. And now there was proof of that too. The case was complete. In the days that followed, I maintained my composure publicly while quietly consolidating support behind the scenes. Family members reached out with apologies. Friends who had distanced themselves returned with shame in their voices. Colleagues who had heard whispers now understood the truth and felt terrible for doubting me. I accepted every apology graciously. I didn't demand groveling or lengthy explanations. People had been manipulated by someone they trusted. Now they knew better. Patricia attempted damage control. She called family members with tearful explanations. She claimed I had manipulated evidence that I was the true schemer, but her credibility was gone completely. No one believed her anymore. Jonathan remained caught in the middle, saying little to anyone. His silence had protected him before, but now it condemned him. By never defending me and never stopping his mother, he had revealed his true character to everyone. The community saw me clearly now, not as the controlling fiancée of Patricia's invention, but as the composed woman who had weathered slander with grace and dignity. I had won without ever raising my voice. I had defeated lies with documentation and patience. And I had done it while staying true to myself and my values. That was the victory that mattered most. The final revelation happened at Jonathan's father's birthday dinner. The whole family was present. Perhaps 30 people gathered in Patricia's own dining room, the same room where this nightmare had begun. I hadn't planned a dramatic moment, but when Patricia tried once more to rewrite history, claiming I had tried to turn the family against her, something shifted inside me. "That's not true," I said clearly, my voice carrying across the table, "and everyone here knows it." Then I laid out the full timeline. Every lie, every contradiction, every piece of documentation. I spoke calmly, without accusation, simply presenting the facts in order. When I finished, the room was utterly silent. You could hear people breathing. Patricia sat frozen, her face pale. Jonathan stared at the table. His father looked between his wife and me with dawning horror. "Is this true?" he asked Patricia, his voice barely above a whisper. She couldn't answer. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Aunt Helen stood up. "It's true, James. We've all seen the evidence. Your wife has been lying about Evelyn for months, deliberately and systematically." The reactions came in waves: shock, disbelief, anger. Family members turned to Patricia with questions she couldn't answer. I stayed quiet, letting the truth speak for itself. It was over, finally completely over. The lie had collapsed under its own weight. Jonathan came to me the next morning. He looked like he hadn't slept at all, his eyes red and shadowed. "I should have stopped this," he said, his voice breaking. "I knew what my mother was doing and I let it happen. I was a coward. I was weak." I waited, saying nothing. "I'm sorry," he continued, tears streaming down his face. "Not just for not defending you, for participating, for laughing along, for choosing her comfort over your dignity. You deserved so much better than what I gave you." It was the first real apology he had offered. Not excuses, not requests to move on. Actual accountability for what he had done. "I don't know if you can forgive me," he said, "but I want to try to make this right. I'll do whatever it takes." I considered his words carefully, my heart aching. There was a path forward if he was truly willing to change and put me first. but trust would have to be rebuilt from nothing, brick by brick. That same day, Jonathan publicly acknowledged the truth to his family. He stood beside me and confirmed everything I had documented. He apologized to everyone who had been misled by his mother. Patricia sat in furious silence, abandoned by her own son. It wasn't a complete ending. There was no instant healing or easy resolution. But it was a beginning. Over the following weeks, community validation poured in. Friends apologized for believing Patricia's stories. Family members expressed admiration for how I had handled the impossible situation. "I don't know how you stayed so calm," one cousin told me, shaking her head in amazement. "I would have exploded at the first lie." "I wanted to," I admitted honestly. "Every single day, I wanted to scream." The truth was that patience had been agonizing. Every slander I absorbed, every humiliation I endured in silence, had cost me something precious. But those costs were investments in credibility that paid off when it finally mattered most. I regained not just my reputation, but something deeper: respect. People saw that I had responded to lies with truth, to cruelty with grace. They understood the strength required to play the long game when everything in you wanted to fight back immediately. Jonathan and I began rebuilding slowly. He attended family events at my side now, correcting misstatements, vouching for my character. It would take time for trust to fully return, but he was doing the work consistently. Most importantly, I felt whole again, not because others validated me, but because I had validated myself. I had refused to surrender my integrity even when it would have been easier to just walk away. And that victory belonged to me alone. Patricia faced consequences she had never anticipated in her worst nightmares. Her social standing crumbled as the truth spread through our community. Friends who had admired her gracious hostess persona now saw the manipulation beneath it. Her charity board asked her to step back from leadership roles. Her own family treated her differently. Conversations became strained and brief. Invitations became scarce. The isolation she had tried to inflict on me became her own reality. She made one final attempt at manipulation. At a family gathering, she tearfully claimed I had threatened her, that I was forcing her out of her own family through intimidation. No one believed her. "Mom, stop," Jonathan said quietly but firmly, standing beside me. "It's over. The more you lie, the worse it gets for you." Patricia looked around the room and found no support, only tired faces who had heard enough of her lies. She left the gathering early and didn't return for several months. I felt no joy in her downfall, only relief that the chapter was finally closing. Her actions had consequences. That was justice. But I didn't need her suffering to feel vindicated. My vindication came from the truth being known by everyone who mattered. That was always enough. 6 months later, I looked back on the ordeal with gratitude I hadn't expected to feel. The experience had broken something in me, but it had also forged something stronger. I knew now that I could face betrayal without losing myself. I could fight back without becoming cruel. I could demand truth without sacrificing grace or my own values. My relationship with Jonathan transformed completely. The crisis had forced us both to confront who we were and who we wanted to be. He became a genuine partner, someone who chose me openly, defended me actively, and held himself accountable for his mistakes. We married the following spring in a small ceremony with people who truly loved us. Patricia eventually offered a genuine apology. It took a year and family therapy, but she acknowledged what she had done and why. Our relationship would never be warm, but it became civil, honest. That was enough. I kept my notebook in my desk drawer, not as evidence anymore, but as a reminder. A reminder that truth is worth protecting, that patience is a form of power, and that integrity, even when costly, is never wasted. I had chosen peace once by staying silent. Now I chose peace by standing in my truth. And that made all the difference.